Hello and welcome to World News here on TVP World with me, Anna Kalczynska. Good morning. The general in charge of Russia's nuclear, biological and chemical defense forces and his assistant have been killed in a bomb attack in Moscow just 24 hours after he was charged in absentia by Ukrainian authorities for mass use of banned chemical weapons in Ukraine. We now go to our Ukraine correspondent Oz Katerji in Kyiv, who has the latest. Oz?
Lieutenant General Igor Kirillov, the chief of Russia's nuclear, chemical, and biological weapons defense forces, has been reportedly assassinated in Moscow alongside his assistant. That's according to Russian sources briefing Russian state media. Now, Russian state media are saying that this was a remotely detonated explosive device planted inside a scooter, which killed Lieutenant General Kirillov. Now, it must be said that Lieutenant General Kirillov was charged by Ukraine's SBU security services in absentia for the mass use of chemical weapons inside Ukraine, with 4,800 instances of Russian chemical weapons being deployed on the front lines in Ukraine. That's according to Ukrainian security services. So this does fit with a pattern of assassinations that Ukraine has been carrying out on Russian soil, targeting high-ranking Russian officials. There has been no word from Kyiv yet, although less than a week ago, a Russian weapons expert, Mikhail Shatsky, was shot dead outside of his home in Moscow. So there's still the story's still developing, and TVP World will bring you more on this as it breaks. Oz Katerji reporting from Kyiv for TVP World.
Now, while the assassination of Russian general in Moscow is a success for Ukrainian intelligence, it doesn't come as a surprise. Witold Rotkiewicz of the Center of Eastern Studies told TVP World. He went on to say that Ukraine has the capability to carry out covert operations in Russia due to the history between the two countries.
So this is clearly a part of a war effort on the part of the Ukrainian on the Ukrainian state and the Ukrainian military. Paradoxically, the social barrier between Ukrainians and Russians, both being Slavic, both being Orthodox, most of them at least, was very low, and the intermarriage rate was high. So it shouldn't be surprising that Ukrainian intelligence is able to find people who are willing to fight for Ukraine and to risk their lives in what is Ukraine's existential struggle for survival.
The Ukrainian government has ruled out any extension of the existing gas transit deal between Europe and Russia. Kyiv, however, is open to new deals with European countries. Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal has said that current deal that allows for the transit of gas through Ukrainian territory ends on January the 1st and will not be renewed. New deals involving gas not originating from Russia are still on the table, however. Most European countries have already switched to alternative suppliers. Some, most notably Slovakia and Hungary, have maintained their dependence on Russian gas supplies. US President-elect Donald Trump does not rule out the idea of Ukraine giving up part of its territory to Russia, pointing to the extensive destruction in the occupied areas.
Do you believe that Ukraine should cede territory to Russia?
Well, I'm going to let you know that after I have my first meeting. But a lot of that territory, when you look at what's happened to those, I mean, there are cities that there's not a building standing. It's a demolition site. There's not a building standing. So people can't go back to those cities. There's nothing there. It's just rubble.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that the first North Koreans have been killed in the war in Ukraine. During his Monday evening address, Zelensky said that Russian authorities are attempting to hide real losses among North Koreans, just as they do with the Russian army.
The commander-in-chief of the army has presented a report on the participation of North Korean soldiers in battles on the side of the Russian army. There are many details about the destruction of these forces. According to preliminary data, the Russians are trying to hide the North Korean losses. The Ukrainian defense forces and our intelligence are uncovering the full picture about the real losses of Russian units, which also involve Koreans. Unfortunately, we also have to defend ourselves against them, although there is no reason for Koreans to die in this war. The only reason is Putin's madness, which has gripped Russia and is fueling the war.
Єдина причина – це божевілля Путіна, яке охопило Росію і підживлює цю війну.
The United States is preparing to impose new sanctions against Georgia's ruling party over concerns of democratic backsliding. The country has been gripped by anti-government protests since the government suspended EU accession talks until 2028.
We have been greatly concerned about the state of Georgian democracy, the actions that Georgia Dream has taken to undermine Georgia democracy. You saw us just on Friday impose 20 new visa restrictions on individuals affiliated with the government who have been responsible for undermining democracy in the country, and we will have other actions that we're prepared to take in the coming weeks.
Speaking after the meeting of EU Foreign Affairs Council, Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski said that while EU sanctions against Georgia have been blocked by Hungary and Slovakia, individual member states could still impose sanctions on the Georgian Dream government on their own.
Of course, membership in the European Union is a privilege, not an imposition. And so we will respect any decisions taken by Georgia. But we sympathize with the people of Georgia. And of course, we condemn the use of violence against protesters. But the discussion was, and the decision was blocked by Hungary and Slovakia.
The joint Expeditionary Force Security Summit in the Estonian capital of Tallinn is entering its second and final day. The members of the defense group are discussing a wide range of European security issues, including how to counteract Russia's covert operations in the Baltic Sea. The joint expeditionary force, which consists of 12 European countries, has agreed to crack down on the notorious Russian shadow fleet. The fleet of civilian and foreign registered ships is used by Moscow to gather intelligence and circumvent sanctions. European countries encountering suspected shadow fleet vessels have agreed to exchange information and coordinate proof of insurance of the vessels. If the requests are ignored or denied, the joint expeditionary force will then act in unison. The members have agreed. The group of European NATO countries is led by the United Kingdom. It was created to ensure a quick threat response even before any NATO Article 5 has been declared. The EU must start contemplating possible revisions of sanctions on Syria, said Kaja Kallas while kicking off today's EP plenary session in Strasbourg. The European Union's top diplomat will lead today's debate on the current state of the power transition in Syria.
We have a key interest in the success of Syrian transition. We need to adapt our early recovery parameters to the new political reality with a view to eventual reconstruction, to start reflecting on a possible revision of our sanctions regime in order to support Syria's path to recovery while keeping our leverage, and to further support accountability efforts at this crucial juncture in order to lay the foundations for transitional justice and reconciliation.
Meanwhile, European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has travelled to Turkey to meet with Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. They both discussed the transition of power in Syria. Turkey is key to further development in neighbouring Syria. It hosts millions of Syrian refugees and played an active role during the 13-year-long civil war that eventually ousted dictator Bashar al-Assad. The European Union is the largest humanitarian donor for Syria, sending over 30 billion euros in aid since 2011. And we now see live from Ankara the meeting and the press conference, joint press conference of Ursula von der Leyen and Recep Tayyip Erdoğan. European Council leaders will need to find common ground on thorny issues such as the war in Ukraine, migration and the Middle East in the next few days. Those heads of state have sent in their foreign ministers to Brussels today to begin with what is expected to be hefty discussions. TVP World's EU correspondent Angela Skujins reports from the Belgian capital.
Foreign ministers from across the EU have descended on Brussels to prepare their heads of state for what is expected to be a blockbuster 2 days in the Belgian capital. Now, these foreign ministers are going to look over plans for their heads of state, which will revolve around what is going on in Ukraine, as well as the fall of the Assad regime in Syria, as well as EU talks for enlargement. Now, enlargement was something keenly stressed by Hungary's EU Affairs Minister. Here is what he had to say to reporters in Brussels.
The enlargement will also be one of the key topics for the General Affairs Council today. The Council is expected to approve the annual enlargement conclusions that will pave the way to continuing the accession process with Serbia that has been frozen for 3 years now.
How the EU finds common ground on migration, as well as the growing unrest in Georgia, will also be on the table. Now, Georgia has been engulfed with weeks' worth of protests and political crackdown. This was catalysed when the ruling Georgian Dream political party announced that they were going to put EU accession talks on ice for at least 4 years. Now, foreign ministers in Brussels recently agreed to strip Georgian officials holding service and diplomatic passports their ability to travel visa-free. This was a far cry from her proposal to impose sanctions on Georgian politicians responsible for inciting the violence. But as she said yesterday, this is a small win for the EU. My name is Angela Skujins, reporting from Brussels for TVP World.
And with our report of Angela, we finish this edition of World News. Thank you for watching, but please stay tuned to TVP World and see you soon.